Hey everybody, I'm Secular Spirit, and we have a bit of a grim topic for today, but it's one that I felt was very necessary to talk about. And the big news last week was that the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as Yoav Gallant, the former defense minister who Netanyahu actually recently fired, as well as one of the leaders of Hamas, Mohammed Deif. So, what does this mean exactly? What will this lead to? There's a lot of things to talk about here, and I did recently do a video asking the big question that's been raging for the past year: is Israel committing a genocide in Gaza? I did that video last week and posted it actually the same day that the International Criminal Court, the ICC, issued those arrest warrants. It was coincidence. I was planning on posting that video that day anyway. But the thing that I thought was interesting about it is how will that impact that debate of whether or not Israel is committing genocide? There's a lot of things to talk about there, so I would love to get through them. Thank you everyone for tuning in live. If you look in the live chat, you will see that there is a poll question. Is Israel committing genocide in Gaza? So you can vote yes, no, it hasn't done anything wrong. Israel hasn't done anything wrong, or no, but Israel has committed other crimes. And we'll get into what those other crimes besides genocide would be, especially as we read the wording of the International Criminal Court's arrest charges. So, yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. And please do like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already subscribed. I think it's really important that we just get a perspective that's as nuanced and unbiased as possible on this issue, because in the end, what I want and what I hope everyone else wants in Gaza is peace and a peaceful solution to the whole Israel-Palestinian crisis. And for those of you who are new to the channel, it's going to be hard for me not to be biased, but I will try my best because I am Palestinian. I am an ex-Muslim as well. So I don't support Hamas. I don't condone the actions that it took on October 7 last year. And that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit in this live stream too. But I just want to clarify that from the get-go in case you're wondering who I am. Yes, Palestinian, but anti-Hamas. We do exist. So yeah, again, feel free to also participate in the live chat and ask questions. I'll try to get to them if we have time. But I just want to say as well, please be civil and respectful in the live chat. I know this is an emotional and sensitive topic for a lot of people, including myself. But I think the least we can do is at least talk to each other in a civil, respectful way. All right. So good to see you here, Gerwalk and Veiled Rose. And let's get started by just introducing everyone who might not be aware of what exactly happened last week. All right, let's do it. So, November 21st, the International Criminal Court, as I mentioned, issued arrest warrants for the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu's former defense chief, Yoav Gallant, as well as the Hamas leader. So he has a couple of names. So there's Ibrahim al-Masri, but he's also known as Mohammed Deif, for alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. So here's the first thing to know about the Israeli leaders. So in their decision, the ICC judges said there were reasonable grounds to believe that Netanyahu and Gallant were criminally responsible for acts including murder, persecution, and starvation as a weapon of war as part of a widespread and systematic attack against the civilian population of Gaza. So we're going to clarify something in a little bit once I finish reading this. They haven't charged them with genocide here, just in case anyone was wondering, and we'll explain what the difference is in a little bit. But continuing, judges said there were also reasonable grounds to believe the blockade on Gaza and lack of food, water, electricity, fuel, and medical supplies created conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of part of the civilian population in Gaza, which resulted in the death of civilians, including children, due to malnutrition and dehydration. And last thing I'll mention is there was also a warrant issued for the Hamas leader, who actually is reportedly dead, reportedly killed. Let me just double check when. Um, Earlier this summer in July. So it isn't fully confirmed, and Hamas has denied it, but Israel has said that he has been killed. Be that as it may, as I mentioned, Hamas has neither confirmed nor denied this, but the prosecution of the ICC has indicated it would continue to gather information with respect to his reported death. Okay, now we'll get to the reaction of Israel to this, and I think a lot of you can probably guess what that reaction would be. But the first thing I want to clarify here is what are they being charged with? Is this a genocide charge? So I think the first thing we should do at this point is to define what genocide is, and that's something I talk about at length in my video that I posted last week. Again, that's in the description below if you want to check it out afterwards. So there's a very clear legal definition of genocide according to the Genocide Convention, which was signed and ratified soon after World War II, and that has more than 150 countries that have signed on to it, including Israel. And that definition is as follows. So genocide is any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such, listing 5 points. 1, killing members of the group. 2, causing serious bodily harm or mental harm to members of the group. 3, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. 4, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And 5, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Okay, so if we were to just go back to the wording of what the charges are, you'll see that there's some elements of this that could be construed to be genocide. And specifically, it's the part where the judges said there's reasonable grounds to believe the blockade on Gaza has created conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of parts of the civilian population in Gaza. So that's where you could maybe argue there would be a genocide case. But when we look at how the ICC judges also said there were reasonable grounds to believe that Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant were criminally responsible for murder, persecution, starvation as a weapon of war, you could argue that these are war crimes and crimes against humanity without necessarily saying that it's genocide. So there's the distinction there. So in a way, this will likely shape any potential future genocide case against Israeli leaders like Netanyahu and Gallant, but it's not directly overtly saying that they're charging them with genocide. So that's one of those things where time shall tell, and that's the thing that I'm going to be most interested in talking about in this video. What will this actually lead to? And I think the next thing that's worth mentioning here is, of course, how Israel has reacted, how Hamas has reacted, how world leaders have reacted to this. And so the Reuters article I was highlighting does mention a few things here. So Israel has rejected the jurisdiction of the court and denies war crimes in Gaza. And the United States, Israel's main diplomatic supporter, which is not a member of the International Criminal Court, said it fundamentally rejects the move. And so there's a couple of countries that do back the International Criminal Court. You'll notice all of the European Union, the UK, Australia, Canada, Brazil, Japan, and quite a few countries in Africa and Latin America, but Russia, China, and India have not signed on to it. So I have a reason, I have a theory for why that might be the case, and it's something that actually came up in my video last week, because when you think about that definition of genocide that I read and that you can actually read for yourself, it's linked in the video description below as well if you want to check it out. I think you can consider a lot of actions of a lot of the major world superpowers to be genocide if you really look at it through the lens of this legal definition. when we look at certain things that have been done by the US in the Middle East, for example, the infamously disastrous invasion and occupation of Iraq that was done also under false pretenses, as we later found out. Could that be construed as genocide when we consider the destruction and death that was caused there? So, uh, we're going to talk a little bit about the role of intent in genocide, but let's get on with the reactions of different world leaders. So, let's just scroll down here. So, in a statement, Hamas welcomed the warrants against Gallant and Netanyahu and urged the court to expand accountability to all Israeli leaders. And a senior Hamas official saw the warrants as an important step towards bringing justice for the victims and that all countries should back them. This was kind of echoed by Jordan's foreign minister. And if we jump to the EU, so the Netherlands foreign minister said his country acts on arrest warrants for people on its territory and will not engage in non-essential contacts. I'm not sure what that part means. But the EU's foreign policy chief said the decision was not political but made by a court and thus should be respected and implemented, before adding that the tragedy in Gaza has to stop. To get a little bit more about the reaction of Israel, so Netanyahu's office rejected the decision and described the move as anti-Semitic. And in a statement from his office, there was also an addition that Israel rejects with disgust the absurd and false actions leveled against it by the ICC. And in separate comments, Netanyahu's office said that the decision was comparable to the modern day Dreyfus or Dreyfus. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I've seen that word, but never actually heard it said out loud. So the Dreyfus trial, and will end in the same way, referring to Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish army captain who was wrongly convicted of treason in France. Continuing just like a little bit more. Okay, we talked about Hamas as well. I also wanted to just share what the Prime Minister of the country I live in, Canada, Justin Trudeau, said. It's really important that everyone abide by international law. So that's classic Justin Trudeau there, kind of saying something but trying to say as little as possible at the same time. So I think it's clear to see when you just look at the fact that like all of these major leaders had to make major statements on this. And Ireland, which has been historically very supportive of Palestine, the prime minister saw these warrants as an extremely significant step, and added that Ireland respects the ICC's role and that anyone in a position to assist it in carrying out its vital work must do so with urgency. So you can just see by the reaction of complete denial and accusations of anti-Semitism and dismissing the legitimacy of the ICC from Israel that this is a serious issue and the world is paying attention. And Israel's leaders are doing the things that they always do whenever they're criticized, or ever since the retaliation against Gaza and Hamas began last year. Whenever they've been criticized, they turn to the same things of your criticisms are anti-Semitic. We don't accept what you're saying. And of course, the classic, well, what about Hamas? What about what Hamas is doing? So that's what makes this a little bit more interesting too. The fact that, sure, Netanyahu and Gallant's arrest warrants are what have taken the lion's share of the headlines, but Hamas leader was also charged with an arrest warrant the same day they were. So he might be dead for all we know. He might have already been killed by Israel, although Hamas is denying that, as I mentioned earlier. But it does show that you can't really say that this is just about Israel when it's literally right there mentioning that Hamas has culpability as well. And so let's talk a little bit about this individual who was charged here. Let me see if I can find a little bit about him for you all. Okay. So here he is. Here's his picture. This is the only picture I could find of him online, and that's the one that's been circulating. So this article is actually from when he reportedly was confirmed to be dead in the summer. And so let's read a little bit. Hamas's military leader Mohammed Deif, one of the masterminds of the October 7 assault, uh, was finally killed in an Israeli airstrike on July 13. And the Israeli military said on Thursday it had confirmed his death in an airstrike in Gaza's Khan Yunis area. And as I mentioned before, Hamas has denied it. And he had survived 7 previous assassination attempts, which is kind of common for Hamas's leaders. And he and 2 other Hamas leaders in Gaza formed a 3-man military council that planned October 7 raid in which 1,200 people were killed and more than 250 taken hostage. And this operation had started being planned in May 2021. So there we have it. And let's just go up to some more details on the warrant for the Hamas leader. So there's a charge of mass killings and also charges of rape and the taking of hostages. So I know that there's a lot of people, especially on, or should I say, primarily on the pro-Palestinian side, who've said that the accusations that there were mass rapes or strategic, intentional usage of rape as part of the October 7 has no basis. And there's been a lot of criticisms about the big New York Times article that was about that. But it's important to note here that the UN actually went in to Israel to investigate these allegations of rape, and they did find enough to say that there could be plausible grounds for it being true and it being the case. I know that's not something that a lot of Palestinians want to accept or believe, but we have to accept it as a possibility. And I think, speaking as me as a Palestinian, I've always said this ever since I started talking about Israel and Palestine on my channel, that there's a difference between Hamas and the Palestinian cause for freedom and self-determination. They're not synonymous, as much as Hamas enjoys a lot of support from everyday Palestinians. And one of the reasons why Hamas has that support isn't specifically because Hamas is an Islamist fundamentalist organization or because it revels in violence per se. In my opinion, my belief, talking to many Palestinians, including those in my own family, uh, the most important thing to note here is that the support for Hamas comes because people see Hamas as actually doing something to end occupation and to help bring Palestinians to freedom. I am not condoning what Hamas has done to do this, but this is why Palestinians are supporting Hamas. It's wrong, but desperate people do desperate things, and yet it's still wrong. So with that out of the way, I did want to just highlight quickly that United Nations report, in case any of you are curious about that. All right, let's see if you can see it here. Okay, I'll try to zoom in a little bit just so you can see it a bit better. Okay, so this dates from March 11 in 2024. So reasonable grounds to believe conflict-related sexual violence occurred in Israel during the 7 October attacks. Senior UN official tells Security Council. So this includes rape and gang rape occurring across multiple locations of Israel and the Gaza periphery. And let's see here. The special representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence and Conflict led an official visit to Israel in late January and early February to gather, analyze, and verify reports of sexual violence. And her name, Pramila Patton, what she said was, what I witnessed in Israel were scenes of unspeakable violence perpetrated with shocking brutality. Detailing her methodology, she said that her team met with families of hostages and members of communities displaced from several kibbutzim. It conducted confidential interviews with 34 individuals, including survivors and witnesses, uh, released hostages, first responders, and health and service providers. It visited 4 attack sites, as well as the morgue to which the bodies of victims were transferred, and reviewed over 5,000 photographic images and some 50 hours of footage of the attack. And it was a catalog of the most extreme and inhumane forms of killing, torture, and other horrors. So this just goes on and on to detail that as well. Maybe I should have included that in the video description as well. I'll make sure to remember to do that. So yeah, and good to see you here. I am not your sister. So referring to the New York Times article, I am not your sister says that article was written by a blogger, not even a journalist. I've also heard many reports about how there was a lot of sloppy reporting in that article, not necessarily saying that the allegations in it aren't true, but there was a lot of sloppy reporting in it. And so comment just continues that there was evidence from Amnesty International of rape, but not coordinated or part of a group plan. So it is possible, even with this UN report, that that's what might have been the case, that there were a lot of instances of rape and gang rape, but not necessarily showing a coordinated effort to do so. Either way, this is like an awful thing, and this is one of the things that the Hamas leader Mohammed Deif has been charged with. So there we have it. Okay, so there's arrest warrants. Now what? What is actually going to happen? And the real answer, as is often the case with things that target or criticize Israel, probably not much. I should say that I think it's incredible that this has happened. This is something that would have been unthinkable. I think if I just reflect on what things were like in 2014 when there was like a big conflict in Gaza, and even earlier when I was a kid, to think that such a big part of the global community would be behind an international court's efforts to, uh, you know, charge the Israeli leadership with war crimes, with crimes against humanity, and potentially even of genocide would have been unthinkable, like I mentioned before. And yet here we are. I think it's really encouraging, and if nothing else, in the big, PR, public relations battle for perception, I can see this really changing people's perception. And I think this is why Israel and its ally in the US are really fighting against this. But on the ground, in terms of actual tangible actions, what is this going to actually lead to? Not much. And one of the reasons for that is because a lot of these international bodies don't really have much power. So, something I talk about specifically when it comes to the whole issue of genocide. So, there's a different body that handles that. So, it's the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, and that's the judicial branch of the United Nations that addresses disputes between countries. They use that definition that I mentioned earlier of genocide under the Genocide Convention. And the way it works is a country has to bring genocide charges against another country, and it has to provide evidence that it's the state itself that's committing the genocide, not people, individuals, or individual groups within that state. It has to be the state itself. And the accusing country can petition for an interim court order to stop the genocidal violence. But it's important to note that the International Court of Justice has no way of actually enforcing such rulings. And from my research, the way it seems to work is that if you are a signatory to the Genocide Convention, then you have to accept the rulings of the International Court of Justice since you agree to the treaty, even if there's nothing forcing you to do so. So this is the whole thing that came up a while back when South Africa tried to bring genocide charges through the International Court of Justice. So that's separate from the International Criminal Court. And it's been months and nothing has happened, as is often the case with these things. And it's actually really rare for something to be accused of genocide, taken to court, and then for the possible perpetrators to then be then to be tried and found guilty of genocide. Based on my research, I could only find 3 instances where this has actually happened. So the Rwandan genocide of the 1990s and the Srebrenica massacre that happened in Bosnia that around the same time, and then there's the Cambodian genocide in the 1970s. And that's it for the last 60, 70 years, which makes me think that's probably going to be very difficult and unlikely that a genocide trial will ever happen against Netanyahu or Gallant or other Israeli leaders. And this ties to something that's really important about the definition, and that's a question of intent. So in my video, my video from last week, I talked about why this issue of intent is so important, and I mentioned a specific example to kind of illustrate that. Let's say you're an army, you're a government, and you bomb a building. You decide you're going to bomb this building. You know it's filled with civilians, but there's an enemy combatant, let's say a terrorist leader, who's in that building, and you know if you get him, then this will make a very positive difference in your war. It could save lives. It could have all sorts of benefits. But in doing so, you will likely kill at least some civilians. So that's scenario A. And then you go to scenario B, which is the same government or army or whatever intentionally bombs this building, not to kill some specific person, but to try and kill everyone in the building. So you could have the same number of deaths in both scenarios, A and B, but there's a difference of intent there between A and B. And the intent in scenario B would be the one that you could say is genocidal. Now, how do you prove this? How do you prove this unless you have a recording, a document of politicians blatantly saying, we are going to bomb this building to kill all the civilians in it because they are scum? It's going to be very hard, right? And that's one of the reasons why I think that not only is it going to be really challenging to bring a case against Israel if it is committing genocide, it might not be a case that it is committing genocide, because that threshold of proof of proving intent is really hard. And I think a case could be made that Israel is doing all that it's doing in Gaza, and it doesn't have genocidal intent. Now, their actions, especially in the last couple of months, seem to defy that over and over and over again. But with the high bar of proof that you need according to this definition, I'm still not sure. And that's why I feel like the whole is it or isn't it genocide debate is really kind of missing the point. It's almost like a distraction. While we're all debating, is it genocide or is it not genocide? And now I've joined that debate, even though I was trying to avoid it for a long time. The reality on the ground is the same. So people are dying. There's reports of the risk of famine and starvation, lack of medical supplies. People's homes have been lost. Their communities have been destroyed. And Israel seems to be in the process of clearing the entirety of the north of Gaza and big chunks of Gaza along the border between Gaza and Israel from all civilians. So it's crowding them into smaller and smaller areas closer to the southern border of Egypt, and it's bombing that part of Gaza as well. So there's nowhere for civilians to go where they can be safe. So whether or not it can be legally defined and found to be genocide, those are the things that need to change. Yeah, it's really tough, and it's really sad, because while there's all this political talk and legal speak, it's people like you and me that are dying, that are suffering, and like living lives that I can't even imagine. And that's why when I posted my video last week, and I was half expecting it not to get that much in terms of viewership because it's like a sensitive, unpleasant, controversial topic. But I think it's also something that a lot of people will just pounce on to criticize as anti-Semitic or condoning what Hamas has been doing. And as I explained already, there's a difference between Hamas and the Palestinian cause for self-determination. And just because Hamas has done really bad things, that doesn't automatically just excuse Israel to do whatever whatever it wants. And that's something that sadly seems to be lost in all of this conversation. And when I was looking at the comments in the video, I just saw a litany of all the dodges, all the distractions that I've seen from Israelis and their supporters over the past few months. Well, why don't you talk about Hamas? Why don't you mention that Hamas should just surrender and give up the hostages? And you know how Hamas embeds itself amongst civilians and the tunnels under hospitals and so on and so forth. So there's a kind of weird rationale about that because let's say there's a hospital and there's Hamas fighters in it, but it's also filled with civilians, women, and children. So let's just bomb it anyway. Let's just destroy it, wipe it to the ground. We have no other choice. It's a weird kind of dehumanizing logic, and that dehumanization is really really sad and upsetting to see because when I talk to people like this online, I really get the sense that they feel like they're completely in the right. You know, there's this element of, well, that's reality, and that's the situation that Hamas has forced us in, and that's the way it has to be. And more annoying than that is this whole. If you're on social media a lot, you've probably seen it. This whole "f around and find out," "fuck around and find out," addressed to Hamas. So there's this gleeful reveling in the suffering of Palestinians, especially if they happen to support Hamas. And people just need to step back and remember the humanity of others and try to put themselves in their shoes. And so I'm an ex-Muslim, and one of the main reasons I started this channel is just to talk about the harms of Islam. And I know all those harms directly. And to see that Islam is being used uh, as the excuse for everything that, or sorry, the justification for everything that Israel is doing is so disgusting. To say, well, we're faced with Islamic terrorists who just want to wipe us out the earth, and so we're allowed to do whatever we want in killing and destroying Palestinians and their communities, their lives, is ridiculous. Islam is definitely a factor in this. I'm not denying that. And as Palestinians have become more and more desperate and hopeless, more and more of them have turned to Islam because they have nothing else to turn to. That's why they've turned to Hamas. And in an ironic way, and perhaps in a way that some Israeli leaders actually wanted or intended, uh, Israel's actions over the past few decades and over the past year is pushing more Palestinians into Islamism and extremism and violence. So that's what I have to say about that. I mean, I didn't envision when I started this channel that I'd be uh, proving, trying to prove this counterpoint to what a lot of other ex-Muslims are saying about Islam and how it radicalizes people. It does radicalize people. It does inspire people to violence. But that's not the simple solution, or sorry, the simple reason for what is happening in Israel and Palestine. In the end, it's a case where there's two groups of people and they're in the same land, and one group is the dominant one, and that's Israel. No matter how much it tries to present itself as this helpless victim, it's the dominant one. And in a way in which it's trying to legitimize what it's doing, it's saying, well, we're dealing with terrorists, we're dealing with Islamist extremists. What they're actually dealing with is millions and millions of people who are in this land, who had roots in this land going back centuries, and many of whom have been kicked out or are living in an apartheid state or in refugee camps scattered around the world, and camps in Israel and Palestine as well. And that's the thing that we have to remember once again in all of this. So yeah, it's really sad to see that there's so much denial. And I think the more I talk with Israelis, and just for you all to know, I do have a video in the works that uh, might be coming out in the next couple of weeks or not. So the idea is to have a live interview with someone who is an Israeli who actually left Israel because of his disgust and horror at what his country has done to Palestinians in Gaza. And I'm hoping to do an interview with him soon, because if nothing else, you might look at me and say, okay, well, you're a Palestinian, so you're an ex-Muslim, but you're still blinded. Um, you're still hopelessly biased. Well, maybe if you listen to an Israeli person who lived there almost his entire life, then you can actually hear and see the words that are coming from my mouth, coming from his, and then they can register, because that's the sad reality that I know. Even as I'm making this video right now, there's going to be people watching it who are just going to dismiss everything I say as completely and hopelessly biased and condoning violence and hatred and all that. And that's something one Israeli actually told me. So to you who've seen my channel for a long time, do I come off as someone who has hate in their face and in their voice when I talk about things, when I talk about even very sensitive things like the harms Islam has done, that Muslims have done to others, or the harms that Israel has done? Do you see the face of someone filled with hatred? And yet, this is the thing that blew my mind, that this Israeli looked into my eyes and saw hatred. And that's a scary, sad thing, because it makes me think about what life must be like for a lot of Israelis. It really must be a nightmare. And the more and more the things like this arrest warrant against Netanyahu, their leader, the more those kinds of things happen, the more that they see people around the world in countries like Japan, Canada, all over Europe, wherever, places that aren't necessarily Muslim, that aren't Muslim majority countries, and that aren't and that these protests aren't being necessarily led by Muslims. What are they supposed to think? It's forcing them to confront the violence and oppression that Israel has always been built on. It's definitely an upsetting thing, and I think that's why we're seeing a lot of Israelis lashing out in all sorts of ways. And if we want to talk about Gaza specifically, lashing out with horrid, indiscriminate violence, and the dehumanizing is incredible. In my video from last week, I posted a few examples of not things that Israeli political leaders have said, calling Israelis human animals or inhuman animals. That distinction is really interesting to me. I don't know which one is worse. Besides the leaders, just hear the things that everyday people say. There's a clip that I included in the video where it was a group of Israeli soccer fans who were chanting about killing all the Arabs, and part of the chant was talking about how there's no school in Gaza because there's no children left anymore. These are little children. Where is the humanity? Where is the empathy? And I also shared a clip of what was reported to be Israeli soldiers laughing and mockingly singing songs as they watched a drone strike blow up a part of Gaza. This is what it's come to. And yet, what I imagine the Israelis watching this, or who've heard these kinds of criticisms before, will say, well, what about Hamas? Like, what about the Palestinians who support Hamas? I mean, it's like an old adage of the two wrongs don't make a right. And to say that there isn't dehumanizing language from Palestinians, who I don't think anyone can honestly say that there isn't. there is. I've heard it, and it's something that I've tried to fight and resist in my own personal life and online. We shouldn't dehumanize Israelis, even the Israelis who've done horrible things, who've killed innocent people, because that's just falling in the same trap that we've been falling in over and over again with this whole conflict of dehumanizing each other so we can justify doing horrible things to each other. Here's the end state of this. Israelis aren't going anywhere. Palestinians aren't going anywhere. There has to be some kind of solution to bring these people together. And that's why you could say that the arrest warrant against Netanyahu is a good thing, because maybe it will lead to a short-term future, sometime in the near future, where a political leader like Netanyahu can't be the one in power in Israel. And that's what I really hope, even though it seems like, if anything, there's a lot of Israelis that feel that Netanyahu hasn't done enough, that he's endangered the hostages, and that they need someone who's a bit more brutal, a bit more severe to, finish the job. And that's a scary thought in of itself. My hope is that it will lead to people Israelis seeing that this is not the way forward. We need to change something. We need to take down this oppressive apartheid system that we've built. Well, the first step has to be to see that it is an oppressive apartheid system. And that's something I think a lot of Israelis are in denial about. The level of denial is really scary. It's really scary that there's people that are just like you and me, and because they've lived in this country their whole lives, and because of the ugliness of what this country is built on in the past and in the present, they live, I don't know how else to call it, but in a delusion. And how do you talk to someone who's in the midst of a delusion, especially when, because of this delusion, they're going out and killing and oppressing people? It's really difficult to break through that fog. And me directly saying this right now, calling it a delusion, might actually be a bad thing. It might actually lead to a situation where the people I'm accusing this of will close down their ear, like they'll shut their ears, close their eyes, and hide behind their walls even more, and then lash out and attack even more viciously, because I'm hitting it right there where that delusion is, and pointing out that it's a delusion. So I don't know what the solution is beyond just trying to say the truth as I see it. So thank you so much for your words, Drusilla. I recognize your name from many past live streams and comments. You seem very intentional with what you say, and concern and care for all people. Thank you so much. And it's good to see a few other familiar faces. L'Islam spiegato de un cane. How's my Italian there? Good to see you. So I just went on the dog in there. His name's Nero, or her name is Nero, I should say. Their channel recently for a long conversation, long interview about Israel and Palestine and my perspective on that, which I've shared a little bit here. I do highly recommend you check out that channel, especially if you speak Italian, which I do not, as you could tell by my pronunciation. So let's see how the poll is going. So, is Israel committing genocide in Gaza? So 88% say yes, 6% say no, and 6% say, I should say 6% say no, it hasn't done anything wrong, and 6% say no, but it's committed other crimes. So, yeah, I am preaching to the choir here, I suppose. And that's another thing that's made me reflect for a long time about all this stuff on social media, is everyone's just talking to their own echo chambers. I'm really trying to reach out to people who don't agree with me in talking about this subject, whether they're ex-Muslims or not. And that's why I frame the videos and the titles in certain ways, because I don't want to push people away necessarily who don't agree with my perspective. I want to hear what they have to say, and I want to challenge it. Because just talking to people who already agree with you, what's really the point of that beyond having that initial solidarity? But if you want to create change in the world, I think it's really important to try and talk to people who don't already agree with you. And thank you so much. Apparently my Italian pronunciation was decent enough. So yeah, I'm aware, for example, that Atheist Republic creator founder. I'm not sure what his role is exactly there, but some of you who follow the ex-Muslim space might be familiar with him, Arman Nawabi. So he's been someone who's been posting videos constantly, criticizing Hamas, defending Israel for the past few months. And this is someone who was one of the first ex-Muslims that I noticed on social media once I started going on it for, exploring what the community was like and to just talk about the harms of Islam. And it was really disappointing to see that he feels so strongly as being pro-Israel and not anti-Hamas, but also anti-Palestinian self-determination. He recently did a live stream just saying that the ICC, the International Criminal Court, has a shocking bias in doing this. If anything, the global community has had a shocking bias to support Israel for decades and decades, and to come to that conclusion again in their own separate echo chamber, it's really sad to see. And yeah, Shady. So Shady says I unsubbed from Atheist Republic because of this. I don't blame you because the barrage is constant. It's really just in your face over and over and over again. Drusilla adds, I couldn't watch anymore. It felt icky, and that's why I really appreciate that the people here, you're watching and trying to just push a counter narrative to the one that seems like the prevailing one. But I honestly think it's changing, and it's sad that it took such a horrible tragedy for this to happen, this tragedy of this past year and the tragedy of October 7 for this greater global awareness to happen. But that's often how the humanity seems to work. So yeah, I mean, I've said everything that I want to say, so I don't want to keep this live stream going on for much longer than necessary. If you have any questions for me in the live chat, I'm happy to answer them before I sign off. Just feel free to do so right now. But if you don't, I just want to also take an opportunity again to say, please like this video. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Well, one other thing I want to mention is that December is Ex-Muslim Awareness Month, and this is an initiative that has been led by a friend of the channel, Haram Doodles. She's a ex-Muslim artist. You can find her work on Instagram. Really, really great stuff that has a lot of poignant critiques of Islam, often in humorous ways. And the whole point of Ex-Muslim Awareness Month is, as you can guess from the name of it, to increase awareness of the struggles of ex-Muslims and to also normalize being an ex-Muslim. So I'm going to be posting a lot of content for that. So not just Israel and Palestine stuff. So I'm looking forward to that, if anything, for some sanity, because it took me two, maybe a bit longer weeks to do the research and writing for the last couple of Israel and Palestine videos I've done. And it's really depressing and sad to think about. I mean, that's nothing compared to what people there are going through. And there is an element of, well, I feel like I have to do something living in Canada where I'm safe and free and comfortable. But living in that domain, in that world, especially when people who defend Palestinians are viewed as those who condone murder and massacre and rape and so on and so forth, it's not easy. Thank you so much, Shady. Shady says, appreciate all your hard work. I really appreciate you saying that. So yeah, for Ex-Muslim Awareness Month, I'm going to be posting a video soon with Haram Doodles. I hope you all have a chance to check that out. And yeah, looks like no questions in the live chat. No worries there. So I'm going to sign off now and just finish off by thanking all my patrons who help make this channel possible and encourage me to keep going, even though I'm presenting a counter narrative that's wildly unpopular. it makes it easier to know that I have the support of so many people like you. And if you want to support the channel, I do have a Patreon. As you can see, the link is below in the video description. And if you want to make a one-time donation, I also have a PayPal, so feel free to donate and support that way as well. So the TLDW, the too long didn't watch of this video, is it's really encouraging that arrest warrants have been issued by an international criminal court, but much like the International Court of Justice of the UN, it doesn't really have that much power. A bunch of the major world superpowers aren't even signed onto it. And so it will likely not lead to very much. It will be unlikely that Netanyahu and Gallant will ever be arrested. But this could be an encouraging change in the global perception of Israel's leaders and the actions of Israel in Gaza. And in the bleak situation for Palestinians, that's a positive and something to be optimistic about. So yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. And yeah, I'll be back with another video for Ex-Muslim Awareness Month very, very soon. And oh, Drusilla, to answer your question, Haram Doodles is not on YouTube as far as I'm aware, but she is on Instagram. Please check her out. Okay, everyone, take care and see you soon. Bye-bye.